at Arch Capital Management, the whole idea there is not to trade a single strategy. It's to be as all-weather as possible and to assemble as many individual, market neutral alphas, if you will, to be traded at the same time. And ideally, if each one can produce some consistent profitability and they're not correlated well with each other, then the combination of all of them should produce a nice smooth trajectory over time that has decent performance and low volatility. So that's done by trying to exploit as many of these little sub strategies as possible. Some of them, I guess, you could define as true alpha, in the sense that you're really capturing something that is an anomaly that is in and of itself kind of a profitable proposition. Some of them are more, I guess, what the academics would distinguish as being more risk premium type of trades. And I think those are fine as well. And I think that a lot of people think of them as the same thing. But the truth is that there are times where the public gets nervous. I mean, I like to talk about sometimes with interns this very simple trading strategy, and Alex, we've talked about it, where you buy the S&P if it trades down 3 days in a row. It's a remarkably successful strategy over the years. It's very, very simple. But the fact that it still works kind of pinpoints what I'm trying to say about these, profitable trades over time, which is that if the market perceives risk, uh, if after 3 days of the market going down every day, there's a change in mood, people get a
Mhm.
little nervous. Oh, maybe I need to use this money. Maybe I don't need to put it away for 30 years. I sort of need to do something with it now. There tends to be just a little bit of a sell-off that takes place then. And yes, it's an example of a catch a falling knife type of strategy. You don't want too many of those in your portfolio because they all tend to kind of do well and poorly at the same time. But a small part of your portfolio, I think, can be devoted to that sort of trade. And they exist in all sorts of markets. And again, if you trade them at the appropriate size, and maybe we can talk about that later, you can profit from this notion that you can be in a market that others at that moment don't want to be in and make some money from it. Is that alpha? Not exactly. You're sort of taking a risk that others don't want to take. You could think of short volatility as being the same thing. Short volatility over time works. People can make money, obviously, assuming they don't trade too much of it. But what you're really doing is kind of selling insurance. Of course, the insurance industry works very well and is extremely profitable, as we know, because they're essentially doing the same thing. They're making some money from a risk that other people don't want to take. So that's a big part of it. And obviously, just willy-nilly, you know, only doing trades that other people don't want to do is not the formula for success. You have to know how to assemble all of those things together. But that type of trade is an example, I would say, of like a risk aversion trade or a risk premium trade that you can definitely capitalize on. The other type, more specifically, the alpha, would be something where you're really capturing something that doesn't have that kind of characteristic to it. And a good example there um, would be, and this is fairly well known, but I think it falls into this category, is the window dressing trade. And as a lot of people know, banks like to lend money. They lend out a lot of money, and they will do as much of that as the regulators allow them to do. But what happens at quarter ends usually is that the banks have to go through this sort of snapshot process where their loans, at least the way I understand it, get reviewed and they have to make sure that they're under their regulatory limits at quarter end. And that means that there's this fairly predictable and fairly sustained over the years. That's the other nice thing about it. It's not, it's a trade that to trade it so big that it's not going to work anymore means that you have to trade in the volumes that are comparable with where the banks are lending money. And that takes a lot of money to make that kind of trade go away. But essentially what the banks have to do, just to finish the thought, is that they have to unwind a lot of the trades that have put them over that limit before quarter ends. And they then tend to move those into trades, basically treasuries that tend to have much less regulatory capital that needs to be placed against it. So you see this sort of trickling out of corporate bonds, loans, what have you, and a move into treasuries, across a number of different maturities that lasts a few days, and then after the quarter, they're able to kind of release that cash and put it back into loans. So that's a good example of something that if you can find enough trades like those, and they're not, a ton of them out there, but I think that's kind of what somebody like me has to think my job is to always be on the lookout for something like that, an explainable alpha that, has a reason for working the way it does, and you have to come up with an implementation that's going to trade it in the right size and capitalize on exactly, the right way to get in and out of that kind of opportunity.
Yes.